Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. My name is Giorgia, and I'm researcher at Transcrime Center. What I will be showing you today is actually a work in progress paper, which is based on some preliminary, or what I would be calling as preliminary findings that come from the research activities that we have been conducting within the FALCON project. And the focus of the present study will be on schematizing and conceptualizing the grant corruption related illicit financial flows. So what we would be doing is something similar to what Jacopo explained, but let's say from a higher level. So instead of deepening a single empirical case studies, we tried to identify key patterns and again, schematic picture across different case studies. So just to give you, again, a bit of context, grant corruption and illicit financial flows are strictly connected. So from one side, grant corruption acts as a destination for illicit financial flows. So as you know, in this case, we will talk about money dirtying. And from the other side, it acts as a source for illicit financial flows. And in this case, we instead talk about money laundering. The issue is that detecting grant corruption schemes is very challenging because of its complex nature and, let's say, hiding nature. However, a possible solution is offered by the approach to untangle grant corruption into different phases and then track illicit financial flows. And what the existing literature on money laundering specifically suggests us is that tracking illicit financial flows means to recognize the, let's say, the involvement, the presence of some key elements, such as the involvement of multiple jurisdictions, of professional enablers and other facilitators, and also the involvement of sophisticated legal and financial structures that are indeed used to conceal such illicit flows. However, even if this strict connection, so between grant corruption and illicit financial flows is well recognized, the existing research on this specific topic is limited to few empirical studies or in general to anecdotal cases. So what we need is to deepen our understanding on some key elements that are useful to study the illicit financial flows related to grant corruption that are identified as the types of utility exchange, the transaction channels employed, the intermediaries involved, as well as the number and the nature of the jurisdictions involved. So what we are going to do through this study is to go toward a comprehensive framework, kind of an anatomy of grant corruption schemes that is able to focus on the related illicit financial flows by integrating money dirtying and money laundering into a single perspective of money flows within grant corruption. So this study will focus on key patterns of illicit financial flows within grant corruption case studies. And so we will focus on those key elements that I mentioned before, such as the utility types, transaction channels, and so on, by disentangling money dirtying and money laundering flows in order to identify possible differences across the two, as well as overlapping elements. As already said, this study is based on some preliminary findings from the FALCON project. And what I will be showing you today refer to the specific results. So what we did under this project was conducting a qualitative analysis based on case studies, as I told you. And here we followed a 5W1H approach. So from the case studies that we retrieved, we collected key information to answer those questions. So when, where, why, and so on. And from those key information, we retrieved our key variables for our analysis. The final sample included 42 case studies, which were retrieved from multiple set of sources, such as investigation files, official press releases, as well as open source media news. And this in order to puzzle all the necessary information in order to structure a solid base for our analysis. Here, for example, you can see the distribution in terms of economic sectors represented, For example, energy supply was the most represented, and also the temporal span of the cases, so from the 90s to 2024. So moving to the results, what we found was that in the majority, oh, sorry, I had a pop-up. What we found was that in a majority of these schemes, the monetary compensation was employed to move money, whether it was direct payments or indirect payments. So you can see that in almost 86% of the cases employed monetary compensation. But we can also see that also non-monetary benefits played an important, a relevant role in almost 29% of the cases. And from our qualitative analysis, we can say that those kind of utilities were employed to strengthen and construct the corrupt relationships, so to strengthen also the trust across the relationships. So these already start suggesting us relevance of the social, let's say, a social dimension within money dirtying schemes. For example, in this case, businessmen offered both monetary payments and gifts, luxury gifts, in order to secure a public contract during COVID-19. And also the public officials corrupted by those, say, bribes, in exchange, sent also as well some luxury gifts. So again, here we can see how the non-monetary benefits were used to strengthen the corrupt relationship across the two. Then moving to the transaction channels employed and trying to detect some possible differentiation or overlapping elements between money dirtying and money laundering flows, found the central role of banking transactions, here represented in the figure as wire transfers, in both money dirtying and money laundering flows. As you can see, the absolute numbers are almost the same, but you can notice that offshore accounts and real estate were relatively higher, more involved in money laundering schemes. And this may suggest, first of all, a geographical proximity that characterized money dirtying schemes. And again, also the a possible importance of the social dimension of money dirtying schemes, confirmed again by the fact that, by the evidence that cash and gifts again were relatively more involved in money dirtying flows. However, in general, it is always better to keep in mind that all of these channels are not self-exclusive, but are often involved, there is involvement of multiple channels within the same complex scheme. Here, for example, the governor of the Delta State in Nigeria misappropriated millions of public funds, and it funneled them through offshore accounts to foreign countries such as British Virgin Islands, Switzerland, and Cyprus. And it also used them to finance luxury real estate in other foreign countries. So again, you can see the involvement of multiple channels within the same scheme. Another key element that I mentioned as relevant to be focused on for providing a general anatomy of corruption is the involvement of intermediaries, whether in terms of corporate vehicles or in terms of individuals. So starting from the corporate vehicles, we found that almost the totality, in 90% of the cases, a corporate vehicle was involved. In particular, we found involvement of front and shell companies and legal arrangements such as trusts, and this in order to provide a veneer of legitimacy and also to guarantee anonymity. Here, for example, payments that were used for bribing an Indonesian airline companies to secure some sale contracts. Payments were moved to fake consulting firms. Now, I don't remember whether they were front or shell companies, but those were used to create a facade of legitimacy. So the payments were labeled as consultancy fees for services that for sure never occurred. Just another case where also trusts were involved in order to place money and obscure the true ownership. In terms instead of individuals that acted as intermediaries, here again we found a high involvement of facilitators, of individuals facilitators in 57% of the cases. And in particular, we found key roles in family and friends, business partners, and also professionals. Here you may notice also that in money, that facilitators were relatively more involved in money dirtying schemes. And this again could underline this idea of the importance of the social element in such flows. Finally, our last key dimension for studying grand corruption schemes is the transnational dimension. In our cases, we identified the involvement of 84 countries, and for the purpose of the analysis, we also categorized them into 3 types, which were the location of the corrupt act, the country of the nationality or residency of the corruptors, and the satellites countries. And those satellites were those countries not actively involved in the corruptive scheme, but used as third countries to facilitate the money dirtying, money laundering processes. What is very interesting is that we found that on average, per each case analyzed, more than 4 satellites were involved, which is a very important number. Also, by focusing on the nature of the satellites of these jurisdictions, we identified the most involved satellites. And among those, you can see US, Cyprus, British Virgin Islands, Switzerland, UK, Singapore, and so on. And this, first of all, suggests us that there are also developed countries, but other countries that act as key enablers in corruption schemes, although the traditional corruption and anti-money laundering rankings, the countries' red flags list, do not actually include them. So there is a possible risk that some countries are not well, let's say, represented, well included as potential risks. What we also found is that these satellites were not chosen on a random base, but they generally followed 3 key criteria or drivers, which were, first of all, the geographical proximity. Indeed, you can see that often these satellites reside in the same continent where the corruptive act on the left is placed in. But other drivers were relevant, such as the economic and political stability, and for sure the financial opacity. Also, we found an interesting connection between the employment of the satellites and the misuse of assets, which suggests us that satellites are employed in order to settle up corporate vehicles, bank-related accounts, and so to operate banking transactions, and also to operate real estate investments or also investments in luxury goods. So to conclude, first of all, these preliminary findings underline the importance of structuring a unified framework on grand corruption schemes that is able to integrate both money dirtying and money laundering into a single perspective, financial perspective on grand corruption. And also this complex and transnational nature of grand corruption calls for, first of all, a comprehensive data collection and aggregation from multiple jurisdictions so that it is able to retrieve the necessary information to conduct this kind of analysis. Secondly, it calls for technological solutions that are able to trace networks of individuals and entities. And finally, the development of a country risk assessment that is able to go beyond the traditional corruption rankings that so far are not including some key countries that instead, from our analysis, are playing key roles in corruption schemes. In our analysis, what we are going to do is to go beyond this 5W1H analysis and apply something more structured, in particular crime script approach and financial crime scripting. And what we'll be doing is to, let's say, analyze again our these 42 case studies by dividing the grand corruption schemes into 3 phases, and each will be composed of 2 acts. So initiation will be that phase where the corruptive opportunity is identified and the deal is set. Execution is the phase where the illicit proceeds are generated and transferred. And finally, concealment will be the phase where the illicit benefits are layered and integrated, so laundered and concealed. Then for each phase, we will be following a structured template, which will be including the cast, so the actors, basically the actors involved, the scenes, and those will be preparation, pre-activity, activity, and post-activity, the conditions, so the enforcement conditions, facilitators, and prerequisites that allowed for the scheme to be operated. And finally, we also be integrating the financial component by focusing, identifying also the transaction types, the transaction channels, the intermediaries, and the jurisdictions involved. So again, the idea is to develop and provide general schematization of grand corruption by focusing on the illicit financial flows, illicit financial flows, and the idea would be to apply these two approaches by integrating both of them into a singular general, let's say, empirical analysis. And that's it from my side. If you have any question, thank you.
Thank you so much, Giorgia, for your presentation. If you have any questions, once again, please ask them in the Q&A section. We will now start looking at the questions that have already been posted and that have the most upvotes. The first question is from Natalia Simasco. In case of a PEP receiving the money for consulting, and the PEP declares it to the tax authorities, pays the income tax. In the end, how does a bank detect the scheme? So if I understand it correctly, if the money is corrupt money, but for consulting.
Yeah, just to give an idea, so many of the transfer of resources that we have analyzed, and I guess this is shared also by Giorgia and the analysis she's doing, are covered by a veil of legitimacy, with contracts, that are registered, that apparently, are perfectly legal. So, the point here is, to understand, of course, if the consultancy has been done or not, if, what they are declaring is real or not. So the point is, and this is the work that investigators and law enforcers often do, is about, of course, digging into a huge amount of contracts, a real, sometimes mountain of contracts, to understand, what is real and what is not. Many of the companies, that are part of this long chain, have no activities. They are just producing contracts to justify the flows of resources. So somehow, to give an answer, of course, this is you are focusing on the bank, but bank have their own red alert, red flag system, risk assessment, but this is a work that is more often, in the hands of investigators and law enforcers. I don't know, Giorgia, if you want to add something on this point to give an answer.
Actually, I totally agree. I mean, the real purpose is to provide this veneer of legitimacy. So it totally makes sense that it seems far away to totally normal, all the actions involved in such schemes. So yeah, actually there are a set of risk indicators that are able to signal potential red flags. Maybe it could be in terms of values, or also linked to the operational activity to which these payments are linked to. I mean, the risk indicators are actually connected to the context where about we are talking about. So I would say that it depends. There are indicators, there are red flags, so it isn't just it is not just about the hiding behind the legitimacy.
Thank you. And then in line with this also is, how do you find the crimes in the consulting fees and budgets? And I think this has also been answered just now by you, Giorgia. It's with these risk indicators as well. And then the next question comes from Dilva Joya. For such a comprehensive investigation, how do you obtain the information needed to be able to map such networks of the different clusters?
Yes, so thank you. And here is like about the strategy of investigators, law enforcers, and somehow of also, you know, for example, companies like the Basel Institute with the International Center of Asset Recovery. So there are basically asset recovery approaches, strategies, sources, you know, where data is produced, data sets can be collected, bank data are precious, data sets with information on beneficiary ownership. You know, like just to make an example, also, you know, like there are websites. This is something that I've used for my analysis, is to use, for example, Open Corporate or other websites that are giving information. So of course, here we are, you know, ping-ponging between open source intelligence and, you know, sources that are, you know, confidential or closed, like bank data can be, you know, assessed and used only after the authorization of a judicial authority or a court. So, you know, here we are discussing about really the core, and thank you for the question, you know, like the core of the investigative and law enforcement strategy that are adopted. So in this case, in the case of Odebrecht, for example, many information, you know, arrived and came to light only after the different directors and managers basically described how the system was working. Because before the level of protection was so high that the scheme was almost impenetrable. So, you know, we know there are many different sources that can be used, and this is something really about the law enforcement strategy that are, you know, like crossing a cut, different jurisdiction. Of course, we know that offshore financial centers have very high level of protection of information and data. This is making everything more difficult. So that's a real, you know, a question for even for practitioner, for, you know, professional working in the domain, how to support and how to assist this very difficult, very complex, very long-lasting investigation. I was speaking with a colleague of mine, you know, last week, that it can take more than 10, 15 years to arrive to a conclusion. So just to give you an idea, you know, of somehow how long the work of law enforcers, the prosecutors, and many other actors involved in that.
Giorgia, do you have anything to add on how do you obtain this information? No. Okay.
Oh, well, just I mean, in our case, it was a bit different, but yeah, it was an important challenge because, as I said, we relied on a multiple set of sources in order to puzzle all the information that we needed, and it was quite difficult to puzzle all the information that we needed because it is very difficult to find solid information, news, or official sources that really describe a case. So it is a pity, because in this case, in this way, it is not. It is very difficult to provide solid, large samples so detailed. And yeah, this is an issue, and it is also the reason why. And in the conclusion, one key point is to push for the collection and aggregation of key information from all the jurisdictions and in kind of a standardized way, because otherwise it is not possible to conduct such research activities and detect the possible red flags, indicators, and so on.
Well, thank you, Giorgia. Just a quick reminder, I've seen a couple of questions, a couple of participants have asked if the PowerPoint presentations will be shared. You will receive the slides via email after this webinar, and also the presentations have been recorded and will be on the Basel Institute's YouTube channel. And now we go on to a question from Walter Ewig. What is the expected benefit of money dirtying as a typology? How might wider adoption of this term support third-party policing?
If I may, for sure, I would say that it provides, let's say, an additional lens on grand corruption. So, by focusing also on this side of the mirror, as Jacopo was saying, it is possible to detect and consider additional variables, additional elements that otherwise could be lost. And so, by focusing also on this, let's say, beginning phase, it is possible to also develop some how can I say, some actions that are able to prevent grand corruption acts. And otherwise, if we just focus on the, let's say, after the corrupt act has been conducted, we would lose some relevant part of the story. But I don't know if Jacopo wants to add something.
No, it's just I agree completely with what you have said. There was once that I had a chat with with Noemi, because we had a sort of different lens of wearing. She comes from more legal law curriculum. A political scientist. So we were discussing, of course, do we need an additional layer of regulation or legal framework for on the top of this money dirtying concept? So I think that Giorgia framed the topic perfectly. This is a very useful concept, helping us operatively, being aware of what happened in front and behind the mirror, if we can continue with this sort of idea. But my point is, probably we should not add more burden or try to to legalize or to build an additional legal framework. What we have, probably it's good, it's there, but this is a sort of can give a direction to the strategies of law enforcers, can attract more attention of investigator on specific point. Just to make the example in the Peruvian case. Okay, so the Peruvian authority, before starting the Lava Jato case, they were able to track the money laundering scheme of Toledo. So they were able to see the money laundered, but they were unable to look at the money dirtying scheme of Odebrecht. So they were basically aware that something suspicious went with Alejandro Toledo, but they were unable to understand the direction, the origin, the source of the money. So this is just to give you an example. So just to say that I agree with Giorgia. It's something to be, we need to be aware of this strategy, because it's important. And for me, it's important to attach the right label, the right term on different behaviors. So this is why this piece is compelling. Help us to really understand and differentiate from mechanism and behavior that are different per se, because the direction of the transfer I've received an interesting email just to give us some coverage, but, making the point that the origin of everything, the contract also that Odebrecht had was subjected to corruption, to bribe. So they were 30%. So somehow, so you are right, the contract obtained by Odebrecht, Odebrecht used it, to generate the money dirty scheme, etc., were dirty. But the point is that the money per se that entered was clean money coming from the finance of the state. So per se, we can say that these were, there was a corrupt agreement behind. This is true. But, the money per se that entered was officially and formally completely clean. And they have been dirtied in the process. So this is just to mark this difference that I want to make. The money entering in the Odebrecht bank account was completely clean. Was not the origin of tax evasion or frauds or drug trafficking. Was simply money coming from a public contract. So, we can say that the public contract per se was subjected to corruption, and this is in the matter of fact, it's true. But per se, the money entering was clean, and they were dirtied through this process.
Thank you. Another question also by Walter Ewig is, what choices have been made to maintain the effectiveness of this typology? An example, paying for could also be classed as money dirtying. So I don't know, Jacopo, do you want to?
It's the origin. I don't think so. In this case, it's really a different types of mechanism. We can have broad scheme of drug trafficking. I don't know the type of drug trafficking mechanism that you have in mind, but of course, when huge resources flow, my point is think about the conceptualization that we have given. It's a sort of mirroring mechanism with respect to money laundering. So, you have clean money at the beginning and this money become dirty at the end. So this is where the money dirtying label and what is covering. So this is my answer. We should understand a little bit better what you mean and which kind of case you have in mind, and we can discuss about it. But now, from on the top of my head, this is simply my answer.
Giorgia, you don't have anything to add?
No. I agree. I agree with Jacopo's view.
Okay, perfect. Then we go on to the next question. Nigel asks, how long has this concept of money dirtying been around? I believe this has been covered by Jacopo's presentation. And yes, it should be further developed and expanded as it is very interesting and widens the purview of money laundering. Thank you, Nigel, for this comment. If you missed Jacopo's presentation or the beginning of Jacopo's presentation, it will be available on YouTube at a later point. Kodesh Anshar is asking, are AI or other automation tools involved in the analysis?
Yeah, maybe just give a question because this question attracted my attention, then ball to Giorgia. For myself, the analysis was entirely done manually and without any automatization. So I went through, many pages of judicial documents and extracting links by links, node by node. And so it was entirely, a product of my effort. So I don't know, Giorgia, if you want to.
Yeah, as well from our side, we just deepen it manually, all the information that we were able to retrieve from link connections and other kind of possible references that could enhance our knowledge about a case. So yeah, everything was done manually.
Thank you. I'm looking at the time. Maybe let's have one last question before ending this webinar. Here is a question from Yusufu Mansari. What are the strategies banks could use to cut the chain on money laundering and money dirtying schemes?
The $1 million question, because of course, like being able to do that. So I guess automatization, we have like this usual suspect, like using artificial intelligence, try to automatize, control, monitor, surveillance, being able to metabolize big data, producing really risk assessment, red flags, and everything else, like, because here, like many times here we are speaking very sophisticated scheme that are the aim of the scheme is exactly the one of hiding this mechanism. So they will do everything. Also for the data, like for the bank, there is a sort of somehow similar to sanctions, or there is a risk for them, reputational, and etc. We know about Credit Suisse, what happened, like a couple of years ago, that the entire bank collapsed and has been acquired, purchased by UBS. So, but of course, like we need another 2 hours to, fully answer this question, because it's a very good point, like what the bank can do. I don't know if Giorgia, like you have.
Oh yeah, it's totally. I mean, it's one of the points. I mean, yeah, for sure. The key factor is to be compliant, to be updated, both in terms of technology, innovation, solutions that are able to track, to identify, to detect, automation. I mean, all of the stuff Jacopo was talking about, and again, yeah, follow the updated kind of assessment that are always, we always try to innovate and just to be able to cover the possible novelties that such schemes are including in their operations.
Thank you. So this was the last question as we are coming to an end. We have covered a lot of ground today, and we're really, really grateful for your attention. Before you leave, we'd love to hear your thoughts on the session, so look out for an email with a link to our feedback form, and we'd appreciate it if you would fill that in for us. It only takes a couple of minutes. Thank you for joining us today, and have a nice rest of the day.